It's now time to go out west to the great city of Seattle, which will be getting a hockey team in a couple of years. And I'm excited about that. I can tell you, as a big hockey fan, chance to go out to Seattle and spend time with our next guest. He is a great author. He is a great journalist and a musician. And some of the music that you're about to hear is thought up by Mr. Mark Taylor-Canfield. And he joins us from Seattle, WA. How you doing, Mark?
I'm doing great, Jeff. And it's a beautiful day in Seattle, but don't tell anyone. I went sailing yesterday with some real good friends, and it was great. But today, I'm actually in the studio, and we're recording my song about saving Seattle's iconic music venue, the Showbox Theater, because I had coffee with our city council member, Kshama Sawant, on the weekend, and she was very supportive of the idea of doing that. So now we're going to go ahead and record it as part of the campaign that she has actually pretty much headed up at this point to try to save that beautiful historic building in Seattle. So I'm hoping that it will still be here when you come to visit in Seattle, so that I can take you there to one of the great shows. But there was an amazing concert that took place outside of City Hall last Wednesday, and it was organized by Councilmember Sawant with some really great bands from the local music scene. And it was another great celebration for the city of Seattle and its historic music culture, which is obviously very strong and alive. And a lot of the musicians and fans in the community are coming together right now to save this historic, iconic building. And so I'm really proud of everybody and the folks on the city council who have joined together to try to give some historical preservation status to this building, because it really deserves it. I mean, we don't need any more condos in Seattle, believe me. We need music theaters like the Showbox.
We don't need them in any more urban areas as well. We're talking with Mark Taylor-Canfield here on the Jeff Santos Show, and I want to get in a little bit to this issue because, to me, this is an issue that is going to, I think, go across the country, and it already has in some cases in some communities. But I really look at Amazon as the real villain here, in the sense that the Amazon kind of world is, in my view, big corporations, tearing apart neighborhoods, working with real estate developers to put up condos and apartment buildings and so forth, and raising prices up the kazoo. And then at the same time, you have older buildings, including music shops. We saw this in New York with what happened in fact, Dave Grohl was involved with this. Where you saw, recording studios, be sold out because they didn't have the same interest as did the Neiman Marcuses of the world and the big corporations that would go into Soho. And I just feel that there is such, an anger in middle America. And I don't mean, in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, or Chicago, Illinois. I'm talking about in any middle-class city or town in this country, from New York City to Portland, Maine, to Miami, Florida, to Wichita, Kansas, out to San Francisco and Seattle. And I really feel that this is something that can galvanize a lot of people. And the fact that you had your socialist city council, who's fantastic, engaged, Ms. Saban, to me that goes to show you that it connects with people who are well connected in their own communities. I think you're onto something there, and I think that a lot of other cities should take a look at what historic, art connections they may have, or it could be a music place, it could be an old theater, whatever the case may be.
Well, yeah, I really want to give a shout out to the bands that participated. Now, we've already had bands like Pearl Jam and Macklemore and everybody, Sir Mix-a-Lot, Presidents of the United States of America, Dave Matthews. They've all spoken out in favor of saving the Showbox in a full page ad in the Seattle Times. Well, now we've had some really great bands, some of them local, which are really blowing up right now in a good way, and one of them that had actually been a performer had a performance at the Showbox, and that's a band called Spirit Ward. But we also had Duke York, a band called Soul, Sassy Black performed, and Smokey Brights and Ruler all came out to perform and support the community. And it's the first time that I know of, Jeff, there's been a rock concert that went on for 4 hours. So it was actually a rock festival at City Hall in Seattle and organized by a city council member, which, it just goes to show how way out on the forefront Kshama Sawant is on all of these issues. She seems to always be there when it comes to $15 an hour minimum wage, attacks to fund affordable housing. She's always out on the front and usually fighting the big corporate interests who really don't appreciate a lot of her ideas because they tend to be supporting the middle class and the poor folks and the homeless folks and the people of color in Seattle. But she is out there on the forefront on that, and she's also out there today, Jeff, because yesterday she had a press conference with some of the students at Nova High School here in Seattle, and the students were calling for a citywide walkout by students because the school district said that they're going to be transferring 33 teachers from their schools in the Seattle School District to other schools because the school district is claiming it's a lower enrollment this year than expected. But to the students and a lot of the teachers, it kind of goes right down to the fact that, number one, the class sizes are already too big. Number two, there's not enough funding for teachers' salaries. Although I should give you guys an update on this, too, since we just had Tomlinson from Badass Teachers on.
Yeah, Melissa Tomlinson just on the program. Exactly. Go right ahead.
Yeah, the Tacoma teachers strike. Okay, so they have come to a tentative agreement with the school district. And the school district admits right there on their website that, yes, the teachers did deserve a pay raise. So that's been a very emotional kind of roller coaster ride for the teachers and the parents and the students. But the students have gone back to school in Tacoma, so they have a tentative agreement there that also spread across the state. So there were at least 6 different school districts, including Centralia and Vancouver and other cities in the state that were having student walkout or teacher walkouts. But they all, at this point, as far as I know, have tentative agreements at least. So most of the teacher strikes are over. And then today we have the student walkout, which is a different issue, but it's all related to the fact that we have a funding crisis for education in Seattle. And I think when I talked to you about the Tacoma teacher strike on a previous program, we did a pretty good job of laying out the problem here in funding in Washington State, which is the levy tax system, the lack of an income tax, and the problem that all of the teachers in Washington State are facing, which is funding. And it always seems to go back to funding, Jeff, no matter what happens in the Washington State schools, the public schools, K through 12. It always goes back to funding, and even the Supreme Court, which we talked about, got involved and was fining the state legislature $100,000 per day for failing to adequately fund public education in Washington State. So the teachers know that there's a problem. The students know that there's a problem. And, if they don't fix it, you can see more rolling walkouts and strikes. And even though the state, claims that, that these teacher strikes are illegal, they've actually been quite effective. So you can call it what you want, but there have been a lot of teachers in this last action. There were over 7,000 teachers involved in these strikes. So, and about 120,000 students involved. So I think what the teachers and the students are saying is that it's time to shut up and just, step up to bat. We need to fund education in Washington State, and people are tired of all the excuses about why it's not happening. And you can't always just blame the Republicans because these are mostly Democratic Party.
Well, you're exactly right. And Melissa Tomlinson, who became a Green Party because she got sick and tired of the likes of Cory Booker and Wall Street Democrats like him doing just that. And I think, to me, this is an example of Democrats got to be very, very wary, of if they win back the House, God willing they will, in November, that they are going to govern, like progressives and not govern to be Republican light, because they'll get turned out again, 2 years, 4 years from now. And we can't obviously afford that long term in this country. But I want to get to the point of Washington State and how your schools are funded, because I don't believe that a lot of people know the distinction that is happening in the state versus, with property taxes and so forth, versus other states. Give me your thoughts on that and the kind of the history, in Washington State.
Well, I think this is one of the issues that you'll probably hear Sarah Smith talk a lot about. She's running for the 9th District congressional seat in Washington State in the U.S. Congress against 21-year incumbent Adam Smith. And they're not related, but she is an insurgent candidate that's in the kind of, taking after Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez and Kerry Harris and all sorts of people who've taken on the establishment, and Presley there. So she got through the primaries and is challenging the establishment Democrat Adam Smith for the 9th District. And she is, one of her platform issues is free college education, but she also talks about supporting the teachers in the state and how that needs to change. And those are the kind of candidates that I think the voters are looking for. They're looking for the candidates that really want change and are willing to make those changes, not the ones that are just going to try to hold you hostage, because the alternative, the Republicans, is such a bad choice. I mean, I don't think that's going to work anymore. So, yes, we have a levy system in Washington State, Jeff, which is not based on income tax, is based on property taxes. So depending on the income level of the people in that district, you might have really wealthy schools that do really well, like maybe a Stadium High School in Tacoma or Magnolia High School in Seattle and more wealthy areas of the cities. But the poorer districts have poorer schools that get less funding because, of course, people are paying less property taxes and their incomes are lower, so they're less able to pay those property taxes, which we've also talked about before. Property taxes and sales taxes, which tend to fund everything in Washington State, are highly regressive. The most regressive tax system in the country is in this so-called progressive state of Washington. Another issue on which the Democratic Party has failed, even with majorities in the House, in the state legislature, and the governor's office have failed to address adequately. So you can blame the Republicans for obstructionism to a certain degree, but at some point somebody's got to pick up and run with the ball and stop fumbling it and dropping it, which it seems they're doing. I mean, if the Seahawks were playing that way, people would totally be, bashing them.
Yes,
but
indeed.
right now, we
Carroll
still don't have
time.
a state income tax. So everything for the schools is funded by levies, which each school district has to pass with each new budget and each new increase in their budget. So the communities where those schools are located have to go to the polls and actually vote. First, you have to get them to the polls, of course, which is difficult enough. And then you have to get them to vote for increased property taxes in order to fund the public schools. Now, if you are a person who's retired and you don't have any children in school, you might think, why should I pay more property taxes? It's not benefiting my family. But, the hope is that these communities will step up. Well, it hasn't happened. A lot of the levies have failed. Some of the schools have lost a lot of funding. Even, the school district does say that this year they do not have the cash flow, the funding sources in order to accommodate a lot of these teachers in the districts where there's a lower enrollment than they expected, which is why they want to transfer 33 teachers out of these schools where some of them have been for many years and have really good reputations and, and great relationships with their students, that the students are saying, hey, don't disrupt our education because of your messed up funding system. And until the Democrats or somebody comes along and says, we're going to fix this, it sounds to me like the same old broken record, Jeff, that I've been reporting on for about the last 5 years, which is inadequate funding for public education in Washington State. What's new?
Well, I'm wondering.
To say that, but it's true.
I think you're right on, Mark Taylor-Canfield, as we talk here on the Jeff Santos Show on a Tuesday. He's a regular guest here every Tuesday on the program. If you want to email me, it's jeff@revolutionboston.com or post on Twitter and Facebook at Jeff Santos Show. Mark does quite a bit, actually, on Twitter. We appreciate that. Now, when talking to Melissa just a segment ago, the fact is that I see this issue, and I don't see enough media people, and I don't see enough outside of people like yourself and this show. making a point that if you don't invest in the teacher and therefore the student at the young age, whether we're talking about early education ages 3, 4, 5, or whether we're talking about the teenage years, in junior high or high school, what you end up having is then a higher criminal situation. People in low paying jobs because they didn't have a chance to go on to college, or because of the government not investing in, say, vocational training as well. That you have a lot of people that are on the edges of society. And so then what happens? I would love to see numbers. People say, all right, the 1980s, we had all this wealth and greed is good and all that. Now, if you were to take, the investment into schools in Seattle in the 1980s and then look 10 years later and where are those kids today? And you can name any city around the country. And to me, that should be some barriers that people are looking at. Find out what an investment did to get people, to be some of the entrepreneurs, to be the next Gates or Bezos or whomever. And just to be, somebody who makes, $75,000 a year and, can actually be a part of the community. It doesn't have to be a billionaire. I just think that that's not brought up enough. And as a media member, Mark, I want to get your thoughts on this, because to me, it to me is very simple. But, a lot of mainstream media focuses on, who's striking and who's locking somebody out. And they really don't go into what happens, if the failure of investing in those students and the education process is not there. Then, chaos develops.
Well, there was a time, Jeff, when I think people had this thing called civic pride.
Yes.
So you would be proud of the fact that your public school had a high graduation rate and a high college admission rate and a great sports team or whatever it was, right? But it's funny, it's kind of ironic if you think about it, that it wasn't necessarily the hippie socialist radicals or whatever who changed that. It was a lot of neocons who came along and said, hey, public schools are, they're not what we want. We want private schools. We want religious schools. We want to privatize the education system. And so there was a sense of a loss of respect, for our own public schools. So is it any wonder that we see now a lack of funding and, and a less than, spectacular graduation rate and a lot of things that are going on in public education, which I admit are an issue, but where did that come from? I mean, and I look at it this way too. We had there was something I was thinking about because we had a staff meeting, an editorial board meeting for Democracy Watch News today. And I was thinking, so what do you want to believe in terms of U.S. media and politics, the hype or the gripe? Because the truth is that there's a lot of hype about the United States, and that's great, but at the same time, what is really behind that? What is the state of our education system in the United States? We need to take an honest look at this and stop pretending that we're number one in everything and actually admit that we've got some problems and we need to solve these problems. And solving that problem, it's not going to happen by allowing corporate entities to come in and educate your children. I mean, that's not what public education is about. I mean, it's fine if you want to send your children to private school, that's your right. There's nobody that can stop you from doing that. But in terms of defunding the public education system, and to fund a private education system, which really, I mean, in a lot of ways has its own problems and inadequacies. I mean, there's no perfect system, but we need to have some kind of civic pride in our schools, and that means we got to pay our teachers.
If you let
privatization, let their salary that they deserve.
Exactly. Most important profession in America, as I like to call it, the teacher, because the future dries up if you don't pay the teachers and don't get the students ready for the 21st century, for the second, third decade in the century. That's the only way it can work. In my opinion, I want to
tell you, I am the product of my teachers, of my high school teachers, who took me under their wing and saw some potential in me, and I probably would not be a journalist today if it wasn't for some of those teachers who I still stay in touch with to this day, by the way, and we have a great relationship. So those people were instrumental in my life, in so many ways, and I will never forget that, and I will always honor them for that. I was very lucky.
Well, I couldn't agree with you more. And if Joe Balistracci or Jeff Hoyle are listening to this show, thank you both, my 7th and 8th grade teachers, for keeping me going in a crazy time in junior high school. So I couldn't agree with you more, Mark. And I tell you, I think that for so many people in the United States, education opens so many doors for them. And if you shut that out, then you end up with a cycle of a lot of people, working 2 or 3 jobs. And as we were talking with Larry Korb a little bit earlier, you start taking the family away from the dinner table, away from the ability to help the kid out with after-school homework, and you see how your society fails. Because if the parent is working 3 jobs to bring home the bacon, to get the kid into college, or to get the family structure, it's not going to happen. And then you have kids being grown up on TV and everything else, and computers and video games and all the other things. And obviously sometimes they don't stay home. The criminal element comes into their world, and we all know where that ends up. So, to me,
Jeff, that's the point. These are great role models. These people were great role models in my life. They inspired me to do better and to be like them. And that would be Deb Kyle, Oscar Sisk, Julie Jacoby, Charles Hoxie. They all know who they are, and they all know how I feel about this because we've had these conversations. In fact, I want to go visit one of them on the Kitsap Peninsula before he takes off for Arizona in a month. So. Yeah, I mean, I still stay in touch with these people, and I still encourage them, in the work that they do, whatever it is today, because they're all still contributing to their community in one way or another, even though some of them are retiring.
Yeah, well, there is a real need here to make sure that these teachers are getting well paid, that they don't have 40 kids in the classroom, that they are respected in their communities, and as you say, civic pride in your teachers, not just in the football team or the basketball team or whatever. Finally, Mark, I want to get your thoughts here. There is a lot going on in Washington today. Thursday is going to be this megapolis kind of day on politics with Rosenstein and Trump meeting, and of course the whole Kavanaugh thing. What are you hearing on the streets of Seattle? Are people paying attention to this?
Wow, we had some discussion about that also at Democracy Watch News today during that conference call, it was a national conference call, which serves as our board meeting once a week. And I don't know, I felt like, one, I keep seeing the ghost of Richard Nixon everywhere, so I don't know what to say about that except that Woodward and Bernstein are back. And 2,
I'm so not a crook.
It just seems too familiar to a lot of people who have studied the Watergate case and how a president goes down. And the other thing is that, politically he's in big trouble whatever happens. Also, there's this other part of it, which is, how much do I want to be distracted by this? And so each journalist and each editor has to decide for themselves what they want to focus on. I think that it's my job as a journalist to focus on corruption and legal cases against the president and his associates. I think that right. As a journalist, I have to report on that.
I just get a few seconds left. Do you think, 30 seconds, Mark, that people are concerned about the powerful, in the case of a Supreme Court, a judge, basically taking the road and picking on weaker people as he had in Yale and at the high school? Like at 20 seconds. Any thoughts on that, Mark, before we roll?
The politicalization of the Supreme Court is a great danger to democracy in the United States. The people on the Supreme Court need to have some sense of objectivity, and if they're only there to serve a political purpose for their party, we're in trouble.
Certainly. Great way to end it, Mark. Mark Taylor-Canfield. Catch him out online, Mark Taylor-Canfield on Twitter, and we'll see him next Tuesday. Thank you, Mark. We got to run.
Thanks, Jeff. All the best.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I want to thank Mr. Jason. Great job, as usual, producing this broadcast. I want to thank you for listening. Tomorrow we'll be doing a lot more preview with Joe Williams and others, and Thursday, all talk of Washington all the time here on the Jeff Santos Show. Right now, it's my time to say I got to go.
USA Radio News.
Today, President Trump addressed the United Nations General Assembly. The president spoke for just about an hour, and one of the things he discussed was OPEC and the OPEC nations ripping off the United States and other countries.
OPEC and OPEC nations are, as usual, ripping off the rest of the world, and I don't like it. We defend many of these nations for nothing, and then they take advantage of us by giving us high oil prices. Not good. We want them to stop raising prices. We want them to start lowering prices, and they must contribute substantially to military protection from now on.
Today, Bill Cosby was sentenced to 3 to 10 years in jail for drugging and sexually assaulting a woman at his home. Cosby is the first celebrity of the Me Too era to be sent to prison. Mr. Cosby did not address the court before his sentence. You're listening to USA Radio News. The divorce rate in the United States is falling. USA Radio Network's Chris Barnes has the details.
The researchers say it's all thanks to millennials and Generation Xers. A new University of Maryland study finding divorce rates fell 18% between 2008 and 2016 because millennials and Generation Xers have been waiting longer to get married, making sure they're marrying the right person. It also helps that they're more financially stable than people in their age groups were at one time. Meanwhile, baby boomers continue to get divorced and remarried over and over again, even into their 70s. For USA Radio News, I'm Chris Barnes.
You're listening to USA Radio News. I'm Tim Berg.
It's 8:05. It's 61 degrees.